Good afternoon, one and all. Let me check my sound's going in. It is. Thank you for being here. James here, the EverLearner. Good to see you. I hope you found paper one really useful. Got some really good feedback. If you've taken that session, obviously the exam's gone now. Hopefully that was useful to you. We got some really nice feedback about some of the skills that we incorporated into that paper one session. We're going to try and do the same. In fact, even exaggerate that a bit more, try and get a bit more skills into this afternoon session. If you're here with us live, or indeed you're doing this on sort of catch up, obviously it's half term when we do this live, where we are bank holiday Monday, day after Tuesday 28th. It's 3 o'clock and we've got a really busy session here. So a couple of things first and foremost, folks. Can I please ask you to try and have the notes page in front of you as you take this session? I am going to do a lot of writing. This thing is going to be burning today. This sort of social cultural sports psychology sort of course, it's quite content focused, it's quite wordy, I would say. And we're going to try and put that into the context of lots of skills as we go through this. So you should have the notes page and be completing those as we go. I'm going to do lots of table completion. I'm going to do lots of model answering. I'm going to do lots of explanations and descriptions and evaluations and justifications. And I'm going to hopefully make it nice and relevant.
Bring it closer for more.
Oh, I see. Just been told that my microphone's a bit low. So we're gonna focus on those skills as we go. Secondly, folks, I would be really grateful if you could hit like on the video, and if you can put a subscribe onto the channel. I think we're up to like 14,700 something subscribers, trying to get up to 15,000 this revision period. So we're pretty confident we'll get there, and you can help us doing that. Thirdly, you can ask questions during the session this afternoon if you're in the live session. And the way you do that is if you're on the hub page, there is a live sort of chat bot just down to the bottom right. Martha's with me in the studio and is going to help man those calls, as it were, and bring those questions to me. And if you guys want me to answer a question live in the intermission in the middle and then towards the end, do please fire a question in. And then finally, folks, we're expecting the session to go pretty much the full 90 minutes. There's a hell of a lot to cover here, and we will go tight to that 90 minutes. I will finish on time tonight because at 4:30 this afternoon, I've got the equivalent AQA Paper 2 session for GCSE, so there's no way I can go longer than that, so be reassured it will finish at 4:30, but it might go tight to that time, and we may not have a massive amount of time for question and answers. Now, as I sort of push the canvas forward and get the old pen ready to go, I will put a little bit of a air quotes health warning on this. There's a lot of writing, and there's a lot here for you to annotate as I go through, so I really encourage you to keep pace if you're able to. If not, come back and complete it on a rerun or clarify. Maybe consider taking the session at least twice, for example. That might be a good idea. And as we go through this, hopefully you'll see some of the relevance of what we're going to be covering and why I'm putting such emphasis on getting those skills across to you. Okay, Martha, unless you tell me otherwise, I'm going to line this up and get the canvas over to the guys. Is there anything that I'm forgetting?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, folks, this is always the jittery bit for me. I'm ready to go. Oh, sorry. As I do this, we will change microphone. I'm on this one at the moment. Change microphone to the other one, and you might have to adjust volume based on that. Okay, so here we go. So, folks, we should have a good idea about what we're going to be doing in this particular session, because I'm assuming you've looked at the paper one session previously as well. Thank you for taking part in that, by the way. A couple of things. First of all, we're obviously going to cover lots of AO1 content in this particular show. There's already a lot of that on the document itself, so even without the session itself, that's kind of a useful resource for you. Secondly, I want you to think about the idea of skills in this particular session. I say here, focus on the skills that James is presenting. I'm going to try and do that as much as I possibly can. And the background of which skills we choose are very much focused on the analysis we do of papers. And you can see that in our exam infographics, which I mentioned down here. You'll see a lot of overlap between what we cover in this session in terms of content and skills and what that exam infographic shows. We strongly recommend that you are using the notes pages for this session. The notes page is designed to go along with this session. And remember also that we have written and published a national mock exam, the mark scheme to go with that, and also the model answers which sit alongside that paper. Those are critical resources for you to be preparing. Why? Because we have based that paper that we have written on the exact dynamics and expectations that Edexcel has put forward, and therefore ours is an equivalent experience to doing the real thing. Now, whether you do that as an assessment, whether you read the model answers and learn them, whether you look through the mark scheme and annotate it, I'm not going to get involved now. That's up to you. But use that resource. It's a very, very fine, specific resource that can help you make progress. Now, before we get cracking, we are going to cover 10 topics here. Now, there's some nice ones. There's some nice juicy ones in here. Some of them more straightforward, some of them broader. But what I want you to make sure is that you realise that these 10 topics are not the only 10 topics potentially on your paper. We're trying to cover a range. Remember that in 2022 and 2023, and before that for that matter, we have covered equivalent range of content, and you can probably go and cover the entirety of paper 2 by looking across those sessions, all of which have their own note pages and are available to you on the hub pages or directly on YouTube. So do please get stuck into that. Now then, let's have a look into things. I'm just gonna make things a little bit broader. There we go. All right, consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. First of all, let's define it. This is what we're talking about. It's sitting and lying down too much. So we're talking about here extended periods of time. There is no issue, folks, in you getting home from a hard day and putting your feet up. We're talking about extended periods of time. We're talking about lifestyle. Think, like, almost philosophically, think about how our society structures, and think about places like schools and colleges, and think about workplaces on average. Are these sedentary environments? And I think we can say one of the major criticisms I personally have of our current school system is it's basically sedentary, apart from a bit of stuff in drama and hopefully lots in PE and a few other bits and bobs. You get the activity in between the school bits, you know, going to school, walking, cycling, going home, in break times. But the actual environment itself is sedentary. Work, with exceptions, is often the same. Lots of officey stuff, lots of sitting on chairs, and that's something that you need to be considering going forward. Now then, we are going to categorise that the consequences or the effects of sedentary lifestyle fall into 3 groups: effects on weight, long-term health, and fitness. Now, you have all of the details there. There's that AO1 knowledge. What we are going to do is we are going to explain a bunch of these. So I'm going to choose a range of these, and I'm going to say, okay, what is this? Explain that particular consequence. So if we look at one potential consequence of a sedentary lifestyle being obesity, let's explain that. It is when BMI goes above 30, that's body mass index, of course, and it is enough to cause health issues. That's what we mean by obesity. Okay, that is a definition of obesity. Now, it could be one or both of those things that could be considered the cause of the impact of obesity, but that is what we understand it to be. Let's go further. Let's talk here about osteoporosis. That's a big word from up above there in our list. This is, of course, osteoporosis. This, of course, is that negative health impact. Now, this happens when people engage with a lack of weight-bearing exercise. So think about a person who drives door to door from home to office every single day, doesn't do a lot of walking, etc. A lack of weight-bearing exercise. And what this causes is a down arrow, a decrease in what we call the bone matrix. Your bone, you know, if you actually think about your muscle fibers, I'll come back to bone in a second, muscle fibers appear like this. They're all in the same line, all going in the same direction, all doing the same job. Your bone tissue doesn't do that. Your bone tissue's like this. Okay, your bone tissue's like this. It's a matrix. It's almost like a fiberglass in some ways. So what happens is that this bone matrix decreases in its density. You know, effectively it becomes less strong, for want of a better term, and therefore osteoporosis or brittle bones can set in when that passes a certain threshold. We're also here going to talk about poor posture. Okay, because this could be various things, but I'm going to say, you know, possible explanation of this is I'm going to go for weak abdominal muscles. I'm going to say weak abdominals in a person because they're not active, they're not exercising. And what that can do is it can lead to a sore back, Okay, and this is a classic one for people, especially around my age. I'm 47. Classic example of things that happen around my age. And poor posture can be the cause of such things, you know, and that can get quite serious when, oh my goodness, oh my god, I'm so sorry, folks. I'm very yawny. I don't know why. I need to get a bit more caffeine in me. Anyway, I'll leave that point there. Now then, let's talk about diabetes. Now, we are specifically here talking about type 2 diabetes. Okay, type 2, not type 1 diabetes, which is thought to be a genetic condition. So this is when blood sugar, and you guys, I know you guys know about blood sugar regulation. You know about, obviously, you know the roles of glucagon. You know the roles of insulin, for example. I'm not going to get into that here, but that's from your biology. But the blood sugar fluctuates. I'm not sure what I've written there. Fluctuates due to damaged pancreas. Okay, so the pancreas, which of course you guys know that the pancreas releases pancreatic fluid into the small intestine via the pancreatic duct into the first phase of the small intestine, the duodenum. You guys know this from your biology, but the point is here that pancreatic fluid becomes less and less effective. The pancreas, which is producing it, is less and less capable of doing so, and therefore blood sugar can bounce around all over the place because of that, and that of course can be quite damaging. Also, we're not capable then of storing the glucose that we take on in the form of glycogen free. I'm not going to get into it here, but there's lots of detail there. It's very, very negative if that happens to us. We also want to talk about coronary heart disease, or CHD. Examples, we could be talking about atherosclerosis, which is where we get plaque deposits in the bloodstream. This leads to, could be coronary blockage. Okay, so we could actually have a blockage of the vessels leading to the heart itself, the coronary blockage. This could lead to angina, which is chest pains and tightening, and even heart attack. Now, if you want to get super posh, guys, I'll give you the technical term for a heart attack if you want. It's called a myocardial infarction. You don't need to write that in your exam, by the way, but if you want to get super posh, it's there for you if you want to. An infarction. Heart attack in other languages, or an infarte, or anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to get into it here, but it's literally called an infarction. Now, let's go further here. We could also have obviously impacts as we've got up above on reduced fitness. Let me choose one of them. I'm going to say a decrease in CV endurance. What is going to be the impact of that here? Well, I'm going to say here that, I should say, what's the cause of that? We've got increased weight, so the person is perhaps getting heavier from being sedentary, and so got increased weight and a decrease in what I'm going to refer to as VO2, volume of oxygen they can consume. And this leads to fatigue earlier. So it's really worthwhile dwelling on this word earlier here. When we say we're going to fatigue earlier, it doesn't mean it's going to happen at minute 4 rather than minute 24. What we mean by earlier, it means that you're going to fatigue at a lower intensity of exercise. So when CV endurance is lower because, for example, we're living a sedentary lifestyle, our capacity to work at higher intensities aerobically declines. And what does that mean? It means that we have to switch to anaerobic energy release earlier, and fatigue will set in at a lower intensity of exercise. Now then, folks, sorry, I got almost like little hiccups, so I might have stopped in a second. So we've got here a question: explain how a sedentary lifestyle can cause negative impacts on long-term health. So of course we're interested here in that long-term health aspect, and we're going to bring our answer in. So first of all, what have we done? Let me get my red pen. So first of all, I've got my statement. It is being extremely inactive. That is an equivalent of saying sitting and lying down. I would just sort of want you, I think, to say sitting and lying down. Try and get that language in to your answer. One negative is becoming obese. Okay, so we might experience obesity. That's a BMI over 30. A second negative is having high blood pressure. By the way, this is known as hypertension. Okay, hypertension was when, there's no space there, by the way. Hypertension is when we get long-term chronic high blood pressure. Both these impacts make completing everyday tasks problematic. So we've now got everyday task problematic. I would want here an example. What would be an example there, such as gardening? No, it's not a super exciting thing at your age. I might want to say walking to work. It makes those everyday tasks harder. Try and get your examples into there. But we have got 1, 2, 3. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 ticks. I would want the example to really solidify that last mark. Now, I'm going to go back to our little description here. I'm just going to make one point here. I'm going to be super critical of the answer we've got. I'm going to stress that obesity came from the category of weight, not long-term health. Now, it is also a long-term health condition, but because I've been asked for long-term health, could we argue that this one here should not get the mark? Okay, and we might only end up with 3 out of 4. Just be aware of that. Sometimes you have like clarifiers or distilling aspects of the command, in this case on long-term health. It could be the equivalent of being asked for physical health benefits or emotional health benefits or social health benefits. You've got to make sure you answer that specific thing, so look out for those little clarifications. Okay, I'm very hiccupy, just bear with me. It's easy to say the phrase sort of balanced diet, but what is it specifically? Well, we're going to break it into 3 components, okay? It's the right food, the right amount, and it's in relation to exercise. Now, I actually could talk about the right time here as well, but perhaps that's for another level of study. So first of all, we talk about the right food. What we mean by this is we must have the right variety of both those macro and those micronutrients. Now, I'm going to give you an example of that. We are talking about something along the lines of 55 to 60% of our energy being derived from carbohydrate. That would be a good summary of that need for variety. We're talking about 10 to 15%, written in a different format apparently. 10 to 15% would be protein, and we're also talking about something like 20% to 30% would be fats or lipids. Okay, so that's sort of like the variety. Now, we also want to think about, with regard to the right food, we also want to think about balance, but that's where the right amount comes into this, because that's also about balance. I'll sort of bring this together in a second. So what we're saying is, on average, males are expected, or on average they will consume, or they will need, probably a better way of putting it, 2,500 kilocalories per day. Okay, so that's what we mean by the right amount. Now, no male should be panicking because they eat 2,501 in a particular day or 2,400 like that. That's absolutely fine. On your birthday, eat cake, no problems. What we're saying is that if we took something like a 30-day month, and we looked at something like how many calories should the average male eat, that would be 30 times 2,500. So that is the sort of over time sort of calculation that we would be looking at. Now, females, the reason for this will become clear in a few moments' time. We expect on average that we're looking at something like 2,000 kilocalories on average per day. Obviously, lots of exceptions to this, not least because it very much depends on what someone's doing in the form of exercise. So I just want to remind you of the average figures. The average adult is recommended to do that zero, isn't it? 5 times 30 minutes per week. Okay, so someone who's averagely active as an adult with this, and let's say is male, would be expected to eat 7 lots of 2,500 calories a day, which is, what's that, 17,500 calories? Check my maths on that one. That's what we should be anticipating. Whereas children, what we have as guidelines is 7 times 60 mins per week of physical activity, and there's a bit of extra guideline in there, like there should be a certain number of strenuous activities and what have you, but that's the general picture. And what we're saying is that a balance is a balance across all 3 of those things. Now, often what people will do is they'll go, right, maybe someone wants to lose weight or something like that, and they go, right, I'm going to eat less, so they just cut down on this or this. But sometimes people go, well, I want to eat the right things and I'm not going to eat fats in my diet, or they cut out sugar or whatever it happens to be. Sometimes people go, right, I'm going to exercise more than I normally do and I'm going to eat the same amount. By the way, I'm not a dietitian, so treat this comment as a very, very generic one. But one of the things that is generally recognised in sports science is that no matter how much of this you do, getting that wrong, this will not overcompensate for it. So it is worth getting this right first and then looking at the impact of exercise. That's just a general bit of advice. So diet really makes a big impact. I'll tell you one thing I'm terrible for. I'll go to the gym really regularly, and I will go to the gym, and while I'm at the gym, after I go to the gym, I'll come home and eat the wrong things, and it just shows that balance is not there for me. Okay, let me move you down. We're now going to look at factors affecting optimum weight. So obviously this is a bit of a follow-on from that kind of area of study, and I want to look at these 4 factors. So let's focus on muscle girth first of all. How would muscle girth, by the way, girth here, we could have a muscle. Let me just draw a rudimentary muscle for you. So here's a rudimentary muscle for you. If we were to here it is, tendon down the other end, look. if we were to sort of take a cross section of this muscle, you see I've cut it here, and we'd have all of those. But if we were to sort of say, okay, well, how broad is that? What's the cross-sectional area of that muscle? What we'd find is that obviously this muscle cross-section is smaller than this muscle cross-section. Okay, why? Because we have got a larger cross-section in that way, okay, compared to this smaller one. So that's what we mean by muscle width. Anyway, that understood. Basically what we're saying is that larger muscles, you know, especially lean muscles, larger muscles equals a greater optimum weight. Those of you that are mathematicians or consider yourself mathematicians, forgive my use of very poor equations. I'm just writing this in colloquial terms. But basically, the more muscle mass an individual has, the more calories that they need to effectively eat. Let's think about gender. In fact, if it's okay, I'm just going to change this word to sex. I'm comfortable talking about this in terms of biological sex, you know, whether an individual is biologically male or female. Now then, what I mean by what we'd say here is then that effectively males require on average more kilocalories, and what we're saying there is greater number, as we've seen already, generally speaking, males will consume more kilocalories on average. We can also say that males on average are larger. Now, can I stress this is very much an on average? Can we also say males on average are heavier? Now again, loads of exceptions. Let's have a look at bone structure. What we're saying here is that larger bones, so obviously if someone's taller, larger, what we're going to say here is that this leads to more kilocalories required. Okay, so someone who's effectively larger. And if we think about larger frame, you know, someone who's got a big frame, big shoulders, big back, whatever, this person is going to need more kilocalories than the average someone who is smaller. Now, height works in exactly the same way. I'll just use sort of a light blue and put it over here. Effectively, what we're saying is that taller leads to a need for more calories, so people who are tall will consume more, and therefore taller people have a higher optimum weight. Okay, now we start wanting to put that into sort of a performance environment. So if I just sort of scoot you in here and have a look at this, what I'm going to do, sorry about that bleeping in the background. In fact, if it's okay, I'm actually going to go to here. There's my notes that I'm doing here, but I don't know, but my, I've actually got a video call that I've already left that's blinking away at me, so I'll get rid of that. Anyway, I'll come back in. You saw the notes I was using in the background, just so you don't think I'm doing this from nothing. Now then, we've got a question here. Explain why the optimum weight of a shot putter is different from that of a marathon runner. And we'd agree that probably it is, right? So what are we saying here? We're saying a marathon runner would have a lower optimum weight than a shot putter. So I think that's a fair summary, and we'll give a mark for that. Fine. The shot putter would have a higher muscle mass. Obviously, that refers to muscle girth. So the shot putter would have a higher muscle mass compared to a marathon runner. That one gets us a mark. By having more muscle mass, the shot putter can carry greater momentum. So there's the application and what it means for this performer. By having a lower optimum weight, the marathon runner is able to carry their embodied weight throughout the race. Now, obviously, we didn't know how tall the person was. We didn't know what bone structure they have. We didn't know whether they're male or female. So we focused in on this. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm effectively going to try and produce that same answer here. So what have we got? We want to pick up the same marks here. Explain why the optimum weight of a sumo wrestler would vary from that of a jockey. Now, I feel because we've got a sumo wrestler and a jockey, I probably could go towards height. But first of all, I'm going to say the following. A sumo, just put a sumo, would have a higher optimum weight than a jockey. Okay, I think that's a fair statement, and we'll justify it as we go, or we'll explain. So I think if we go back to my red pen, I think it's reasonable to go, okay, that there would be worthwhile. We're basically saying what is the base relationship between these two performers. And let's go back. I'm trying to choose the same colour. I think it might have been that one. Now let's take this further. Jockeys, how do you spell jockeys plural? Is it IES? I'm going like that. Is it like that? Jockeys, I think it is like that. Jockeys tend to be shorter
Now, because I'm putting shorter here, I'm just going to put in brackets height to make sure my examiner knows I'm specific to my shorter in that sense, tend to be shorter. And this means they have a lower ideal weight compared to a sumo, and I'm going to put in here, I should have put in there, a taller sumo. So I've compared height there. Now I think here I'm going to go for shorter, and I'm going to link that up with taller sumos. I'm going to say that that gets me a mark. So the fact that the jockey is lighter, that's where I'm going to go. The jockey uses their lighter weight to lessen the burden on the horse. So I've got my mark there. It's basically saying the weight means that the light weight of the jockey means the horse has to do less work. And I'll carry on here. In contrast, the sumo, or the wrestler, needs greater mass with large muscle girth to create momentum and push against the opponent successfully. Push against. I'll just put oppo for quick. For speed, oppo. Okay, so there's my, as it were, fourth mark in there. I'm clearly showing what the requirement of this larger muscle girth would be, and it's to create momentum. Now, I'm not going to get technical here, but one of the things, just as a little aside, guys, momentum is a biomechanical concept. Momentum, do you know what the two things that make momentum is? Well, one of them is velocity, how fast the sumo moves, but the former is mass. So something that's heavier, a sumo, can create great momentum against their opponent, assuming they can move quickly. So just a little aside, that's why I'm using the term momentum. It's not accidental, if I can put it in that way. I'm not expecting you to talk about momentum equations in your exam, don't worry. Okay, let's go on to classification of skills. So what we're going to do here is we're going to classify a tennis serve on the open and closed and simple and complex continuum. And what I am going to do here is I'm going to answer in exactly the way that your exam board Edexcel would require you to answer it to get a mark. Teachers who are listening to this, obviously for your ears only, I'm using that language for a specific reason. Students listening to this, you are going to write what I write down on the screen, and you're going to answer it this way in your exam because we believe this was going to get you a mark. Teachers, I blog about this quite extensively, and I'd encourage you to have a look. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Tennis serve, is it open or closed? Well, remembering that an open skill has many environmental stimuli and a closed skill has few. This is a closed skill. Why? Justify that. Few environmental stimuli, and I'm going to throw is habitual. One way to test in your mind whether a skill is open or closed is, can it be performed by itself? Could you go into a tennis court and hit a load of serves one after the other? We call that mass practice, by the way, but could you do that? And the answer is yes. Now, it's not going to be in a match because you haven't got an opponent. Ask the same question of a service return. Can you do it? With the exception of using a serving robot, you cannot. Okay, so that's a nice way to differentiate. Now, this is where it gets a little bit, air quotes, complex. Edexcel would like me to tell you that the serve is a complex skill. Okay, and it is a complex skill because it requires more practice. And Edexcel would like me to tell you it's difficult to perform. And I'm going to simply write that down on the screen. So that's the language you're going to use in your exam, and hopefully that would pick you up marks. Notice that what I get marks for, I get my classification 1, 2, and I get then the justification, such as few environmental stimuli, there's my other one, and difficult to perform, let's say, there's my fourth, and I get my max on that particular question. So look out for that behaviour. Make sure that you complete that. Completion's important in this particular case. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how AO1, 2, 3 might progress through this particular question. We're saying AO1 will be for a describe or a define. An open skill is one that continually needs to adapt to the change of environment. A closed skill takes place in a more stable, controlled environment. AO2 is going to place or classify near the closed end of the continuous. So we're saying here that obviously it's a closed skill, and we're justifying because the tennis player knows they're going to perform the skill before they perform it, and the surrounding environment is stable and predictable. They choose when to start serving. The service box and returner remain in the same position, so the serve doesn't need to be adapted. Now, just one little point there. In tennis, the returner can move. In tennis, you might get a massive gust of wind while the ball is in the air. So if we were to put kind of like the open and closed continuum, where it opens up here and closed here, we probably have tennis serving like here, right? It's closed, but it's not way up here. And if your opponent is moving about all over the place, maybe it moves a bit that way, but what a tennis serve will never be is down here. Tennis serve is a closed skill. Get that absolutely clear. Now, let's take this further. Complete the table for a marathon runner and the organisational continuum. Now, reminders, the organisational continuum, if I was to put here high org skills, okay, what are those? They are skills that can't easily be broken down and practiced, broken down into subroutines. So our subroutines cannot be broken down and practiced separately in a high organizational skill. Whereas our low org, what is this? This is a skill that can easily be broken down into subroutines. So now what we're going to do is we're going to ask the question, well, what is our marathon running? Which is it? And we're going to classify. I'm going to say that it is a high organizational skill. Now, obviously, what I need to be able to do now is justify that choice, justify that classification. Now, what am I going to go for? How am I going to justify that? And I'm going to say because, and there's my key, obviously, skill there, it is difficult, and I want to be specific here, to separate the subroutines of the leg action, arm action, and head carriage, and you could go further, pacing, for example, breathing. It's difficult to separate those. You can't do that. And I'm going to say they are almost always practiced together. In other words, it's a high organizational skill for that reason. But the key thing is here, guys, I'm justifying my choice. And I suppose to an extent, could you have gone for low organizational skill there? I really hope you wouldn't. But I suppose even if you got this one wrong and you went for low, if you gave a relevant justification, I'd like to think that an examiner would still potentially credit that. Now let's go a little bit further here. We're going to go for a smash in tennis. So this is when the ball's been looped or lobbed, maybe from a deep position. The player's looking to smash to finish the point off. So let's make sure we understand that what a simple and a complex skill is according to Edexcel. So Edexcel tells us that a simple skill is the following. It's easy to perform. And Edexcel tells us that a simple skill, for example, can be practiced easily. Whereas a complex skill is difficult to perform. Interesting. You could also look at rate of learning these things. So what is a smash table tennis? I'm going to say it is a complex skill. Now, based on Edexcel's criteria, by the way. So we're going to call it a complex skill. And why is it? Because it requires control. It's not just a whack. It requires control and coordination. Therefore, it's not all that easy. Coordination, and it's difficult to perform. And I'm going to put something further here. A slight technical error will lead to a miss. So it's not easy. That's basically what we're saying there. Slight technical error will lead to a miss. In other words, what are we doing? We're justifying our choice. I need to change canvas. Lovely stuff. Notice these words: advantages, disadvantages. We are talking not just about the capacity to describe guidance, but to be able to evaluate it. Now, considering that evaluate is the command for your 9 marker, that becomes really important. Now, I'm not suggesting guidance is going to be a 9 marker. I do not know. But it is fair to say that we can evaluate guidance types, and therefore it becomes a potential, well, first of all, a potential evaluate of any kind, but certainly potential 9 marker as well. So, and I stress the word potential, folks. Please don't think I'm predicting papers. People say there's about the time, and I never ever predict papers. Having said all that, get it known. So, visual guidance, here's what it is. We're talking about video guidance, demonstration, mental picture creation, wall chart. We've got here, it provides a mental picture, really important for beginners. Now, we're not going to get into Bandura's social learning theory and observational learning theory here. That's not important. But basically, beginners in sport and beginners in technique need that mental picture in order to be able to recreate it. Secondly, this one shouldn't say mental picture. We got a repetition. It's really good for groups. Also, it is repeatable. Okay, so a demonstration can be repeated. Now, the problem we've got with demonstrations is quality can be questionable at times, which leads to errors on the part of the learners. It can take time, and effectively the performers who are watching, they don't get any feeling of the skill. So they lack that, okay, I know what that skill's meant to feel like. We often use verbal guidance, often in combination with visual and demonstrations, by the way. Why? Because it's coaching points, it's instructions, it's tactical guidance. It's often from a coach. Now, why do we do this? And we've got the idea here that we can combine it with other forms. It can be individual or group. That sort of individual coaching is often the peak of coaching. It can be quick or immediate or concurrent, we might say. It's good for fine-tuning. That makes it really good for elite performers, fine-tuning. It's motivating because you're told what you need to do better, and it leads to understanding. Now, again, I'm not going to get into Kohler and cognitive learning theory, but one of the things we know about understanding a skill is that we're more likely to use it in context effectively, and I'm not going to get into those theories. That's in another level of study. But there are negatives with verbal guidance, or potentially a lot of information at once. This is why we often say 2 coaching points at a time, because you don't want information overload. The information can be inaccurate. What is the quality of the guidance? It can lead to misunderstandings. I just want to talk about language. Language is a really blunt tool. When one person describes something, they're not necessarily conjuring the same concept in the mind of the recipient of that message. Therefore, we've got to consider that. It doesn't create a mental picture. That's why we often combine it with visual guidance as well, and it doesn't give the feeling of the skill, which of course is a drawback. Now, I'm going to rush through this because I want to get into our work on this. Mechanical guidance, you guys will know it well. It's about physical aids, it's about support, harnesses, coloured cones, bowling machines. It could be to do with all kinds of different things. But mechanical guidance, what it does, it leads to a kinesthetic sense. We get to do the whole skill, and it can build confidence. Why? Because it can be really good for incorporating safety into something that's harder. Think about an inversion in gymnastics, trampolining, acro. Safety can be achieved through the use of, let's say, a harness. But it can cause over-reliance. People can't do it without. It can give a false sense of security. I'm good at this when actually maybe the harness is doing a lot of the work. And it slows down the learning, okay? So it can be very gradual. And one of the things we find is when you remove the aid, when you remove this, you can get a decrease in performance. Now, I'm not going to get into performance curves and how that works, but that is one possible consideration. Now, manual guidance, handhold, physically supporting. Positives, people get a kinesthetic sense of the skill, and I'm going to throw the word in early, before they're ready to perform it for themselves, and it can build confidence. It's also really good, again, for safety. Over-reliance, sense of false security slows things down, so we've got the same criticisms as we got. Now, what we are going to do is we're going to look at the different types of guidance, and we're going to specifically evaluate them in relation to different types of performance. I think it's relevant to do that. Now, I just want to make a point here. I'm going to give you 2 examples of visual. So I'm going to say demonstrating a vault. I mean that in gymnastics. Maybe it's a straddle long vault or something like that. And I'm going to put here a video of I'm going to put a basketball free throw. Okay, so they're two examples of visual guides. Now, I am going to evaluate those in combination. Just want to be clear, the rows are not working as individual rows. I'm going to evaluate both of these in relation to beginners and elite performers. So first of all, what's positive for beginners and both of these methods of visual practice, of visual guidance? Well, the biggest one is we get a mental picture, which for our early stage learners is critical. But also, we're often coaching beginners in large groups, so that's fantastic. Okay, are there weaknesses with this? It may seem too challenging. Okay, so it might be, wow, I've seen someone do it, but I can't do that, especially with beginners, that's possible. And we've got that idea of info overload. It's going to cause a group of beginners to go, wow, I've got a lot to think about and a lot to remember. Whereas with our elite performers, a couple of things that are positive here. First of all, they get the opportunity to demonstrate. Okay, so they could be that they demonstrate. Now, I'm not going to get into Veely's sources of self-efficacy, but it's actually a principle called styling. If you can successfully perform in front of your peers, it builds confidence. It's called styling. I don't want to get into it here, but it's just something to be aware of. Now, one of the negatives. So the other thing, one of the negatives here is that it would be considered by many elite performers unnecessary to be demonstrated. I mean, imagine saying, hey, Usain Bolt, come and watch me sprint, and then you do it like me. It's not likely, is it? Come here, Serena Williams, let me show you how to serve. It's not likely, so it might be considered one of the least necessary forms for elite performers. Now, let's move on. We've got verbal. I'm going to use two different examples. I'm going to use coaching points by let's go for a dance teacher. Could obviously be anyone, but perhaps we're teaching us some coaching points. And then we've got a hockey coach calling instructions from the sideline. So maybe that's like tactical things or technical things, whatever. So there's our examples. What are the strengths and the weaknesses of these in relation to our upper and lower level performance? Well, beginners, first of all, what do? They can focus on specifics. So effectively the coach can say, okay, of all the performance, I want you to focus on this. This is what we refer to, folks, as cueing. Cueing is where you might combine coaching points with a demonstration, say, look at this. And I like the idea of draw attention. Okay, draw attention. That's what coaching points can do. Now, there are weaknesses as well. They may not understand. Now, there's some really nice theories around this. There's one by a researcher called Donaldson, which is called Human Sense, which is the words of one person may be very differently understood by someone else, but they may not understand them or just not know the technical language. And also, it's hard to convert words to movement. Okay, how do you do that? I mean, have a think about that. I'm not a good dancer, for example, although I'll have a go at when I'm at a wedding. But it's hard to convert someone's instructions into specific movements, isn't it? Now, what about elite performers? What about the verbal? Why is it good for them? They really like it from the perspective of error correction. Okay, so we've spotted an error, let's correct that error. So that's a really good example where it's going to be used. Also, it can increase up arrow understanding. So the performer's not just good at it, but understands why the skill is important. Now, there are some issues. We need a high-level coach. Okay, we need a high-level coach to give coaching points to a elite performer. That might not be available. Therefore, we could describe this as exclusive. Like only some coaches can coach the very best, right? Because it's a high level. It's difficult. Let's keep going. I'm going to go into a bit of a red color here. Let's look at manual guidance. So let me give you a couple of examples. We're talking about a swim teacher. Here's my example. A swim teacher moves legs, and I'm going to put through the breaststroke, leg kick. I'll put LK for leg kick. Okay, so we're looking at the leg kick. There's my one example. And another one would be a gym teacher, a gymnastics teacher, a gym teacher supports an inversion, with some kind of handhold. So, or they use a towel to flip someone. I've done this lots of times in my PE teaching. Supports an inversion. Inversion is upside down or some kind of rotation through the air. So when would this be, well, why would this be positive and negative for a beginner? Well, first of all, we get the feel of the skill. Okay, we get the feel of the skill, and there's my word, earlier than we can do it ourselves. And it's really good for a sense of safety. Brilliant, we love all that stuff. Why is it negative? It can be slow, so it can really slow things down, gradual, and we've got the issue of the removal of support. The other thing I would say about manual is the point about groups. It's really bad manual for groups. It doesn't work because you're doing it one-to-one. Now, we've got obviously our elite performers here. When would manual be useful? It's when we want to confirm correct technique. So it could be, for example, that we want a performer to go into sort of an arabesque in gymnastics, for example, but we want to support that so they can feel the correct technique over and over again without overly working themselves. But there are already issues here. They already have kinesthesis. So that sort of early kinesthesis and getting people to feel that is not really necessary because they've already got that sense of what the skill should feel like. And then guys, finally, let's have a look at mechanical guidance. Let's go into some kind of delicious brown colour. Oh God. And let's think about this. We could be talking about a cricket bowling machine. That's a good example. And we could be talking about a trampoline harness. Okay, so these are classic examples of a mechanical guidance. What are the advantages for a beginner? Well, first of all, we would say first of all, what they can attempt difficult moves early again, so they can have a go at things before they're kind of ready, I suppose. But the other one is the negative is it can be false. And what I mean by this, it's not the real thing. You're in a harness. You're not really somersaulting. The harness is doing the work for you. What about for our high-level performers? When does this become really useful? Well, it really generates what we'd call refined practice. Think about the bowling machine delivering a ball either consistently the same spot or producing variability, either way around. But one of the negatives is that it's expensive, often, not always, depends on the nature of it, expensive, therefore exclusive, and it can lead to kind of like a technological separation. Think about like richer nations and poorer nations competing in the Olympics in, I don't know, track cycling. Of course, the team with all that kind of mechanical assistance is going to perhaps do better. Okay, let's move straight into types of feedback, folks. I've provided the types here, all descriptions, basic evaluation. I would really encourage you to go and have a look. Don't forget this bit here. Feedback helps to correct errors in technique and improve performance. Feedback is used to reinforce the correct technique. Now, I'm not going to get into reinforcement. There are 3 different ways to use feedback as reinforcement, 3 different reinforcement methodologies, and I won't go into that here, but we want to look at the nature of feedback. We've got intrinsic, extrinsic, concurrent, and terminal. Remember that intrinsic is often concurrent, the extrinsic is often terminal, but there are crossovers in the other directions as well. But intrinsic comes from the performer as the feel in the kinesthetic sense. It's good for experienced performers, it's not so good for beginners. We've touched on that already. Extrinsic, from outside, coach, teammates, parents, instructions, tactics, praise, criticism. It's good for beginners because they need that kind of intuition. It's less used for advanced unless it's the refinement of technique. Concurrent is the feeling of the skill whilst it's being done. The skill can be adjusted, therefore it's positive. But it's not possible for fast skills. Also notice, it's no good for beginners because they don't have the intrinsic feel, the concurrent nature. They can't sense that. Now, terminal is at the end, after the skill has been completed. It means there's no time restriction on when the feedback can be provided, and the skill, but the negative is it can't be adapted because you've already completed it. You've got to redo it to have another go at it. Okay, so let's have a look at this. We've got, again, and go with me with this, guys, because there's a fair chunk here, but I want to make sure we get good at this. We've got an evaluation here of intrinsic, extrinsic, terminal, concurrent for an under 10 netball player. Now, I'd probably end up completing 2 of these and leaving the third one for you or something like that. But we've got under 10 netballers may find it hard to use intrinsic feedback as they do not have a full knowledge or kinesthesis of the skill. They may not recognise what they are doing right away or what they need to change. So we've evaluated it. Yeah, maybe not now. Whereas the advantage of extrinsic feedback is it can be provided. It can be provided by an experienced coach, right? An experienced coach. It can be provided by an experienced coach who uses the right instructions, or coaching points you could put, instructions, so very much to do with obviously verbal guidance here, to cause understanding. So we've got that sort of idea that intrinsic for under 10 netball team is not that useful because they don't necessarily know what it feels like to be good or to do it correctly, whereas extrinsic does that way. Now let's think about terminal. I'm going to say a great thing about this is very useful between practice attempts. So think about a goal shooter shooting at the goal. Obviously, they can receive feedback at the end of that. Did it go in? Has my coach offered me feedback? Has my coach told me your feet were in the wrong position, right position, whatever? That is terminal feedback. Now, what about concurrent? Is this positive or negative? How do we evaluate it? Now, for our under 10s here, it's a difficult one. They're going to struggle because they've got a lack of feeling of the correct skill. Okay, so I can't really do the correct skill and know whether I'm doing it or not because I don't know what it feels like. And the other thing is, any kind of extrinsic feedback, it can be distracting. So think about not just the feeling of the skill, but the netball players taking their pass, and while they're doing it, their coach is giving them extrinsic feedback, and that's going to distract them and cause a loss of concentration. Now let's go further. Which one shall I do with you? I'm going to do with you. I'll leave this one for you. Okay, you have a little go at that one, and I'll leave that one for you, unless I feel I've got more time than I think I have, and I'll come back to it. Now, what I'm going to do is an elite handball player. Okay, what would be the idea? What would be the benefit of intrinsic? Now we're evaluating, remember, and I'm going to say it's ideal. It's ideal as it is continuous. And I want to be clear, that doesn't mean concurrent. What I mean is that intrinsic feedback from an elite performer who knows the feeling of the skill, that is available non-stop and therefore can be used. Therefore, it's always available. So it's a completely free form of feedback. Extrinsic, I'm going to say it's problematic. It would be used, by the way, but it's problematic because at high level, like really elite performers, high level, it is exclusive. And what I mean by that is, to be able to coach at the top level, there aren't many people who can actually do that, and only some people would have access to that, so that's a bit of a problem. What about terminal feedback? Well, this can be used post-game. Post-game could be for post-individual skill, and this could be stats. This could be this could be GPS data. How many sprints were done, what positioning, average positioning. However, may not cause change. So we've got all this data, fine, but what is going to be impactful of that data? We know exactly where the handball player's been on the court, fine. That hasn't changed what's just happened. The game is over, it's post-game, it's finished. So there's some issues there with terminal feedback, although obviously it's used quite extensively. But also with concurrent, it's excellent for an elite player. Why? Well, we could be talking about in-game stats. I'm thinking about a handball player here, but think about a Formula One driver when she's driving down the home straight and she's getting that feedback or that information into her ear about the state of play, position, number of seconds, distances, average lap times, whatever. That's concurrent feedback. And therefore we might get adjustment based on analysis. Okay? Or indeed the feeling of the skill, which we'll come back to, concurrent and intrinsic. Now, as I said before, guys, I'm going to leave that vault just for you, and you guys can have a crack at that yourselves. Pause there. Okay. Ooh, one sec. Forgot the sound settings there. Wow. Big first half. We've got about half an hour to go, so we're not going to have long in this little intermission, Marta. I've got a sweat on.
Yep.
Any questions?
Yes, one very quick question. Someone's asking, how long is the exam?
What are we doing at Edexcel? Paper 2, hang on. What is it? What's the infographic? 75 minutes, 60 marks. Does that sound right?
I believe that's right.
Yeah, 75. That's right, isn't it? 1 hour 15, 60 marks total. Split into 3 sections. Section A, B, C. Check what can be in each section. Obviously, section C is the 9 mark extended writing and the evaluate command, and only topics that can be extended writing for section C are topics from section B, so just look out for that. That's sports psychology and social cultural issues. I think that's the titles. Sorry, I'm doing that off the top of my head. So yes, that is 60 marks, 75 minutes.
Cool. And the second question is, what is an example of direct aggression in netball?
Okay, good question, but not relevant to Edexcel.
Okay.
I believe that person is asking about AQA GCSE, so I'll answer it super quick.
Well, the question came in during the
Well, we're on that half back, but just to answer that person, a classic example of netball's a non-contact sport, and of course direct aggression is with physical contact between two people. This is AQA, not Edexcel. So with that in mind, obviously a non-contact sport, netball, so it's relatively little. You would talk about some kind of jostling movement, sort of, that position where goalkeeper and goal shooter might jostle shoulder to shoulder, take a rebound underneath the net, underneath the goal, that sort of thing, but relatively little direct aggression. But I just want to stress that would be for, I believe, from memory, AQA. So I just want to mention that we've got that coming up in the session later on. Okay, Marta, we've got about half an hour to go, guys, so we're going to fly straight back into this. Can I also put a little health warning on this, that at the end of this we may wrap up quite quickly because we are due on the other stream at 4:30. So we've got time to get everything done, but just be aware the wrap up might be, we might wrap up, if I can put it that way. Let me make sure I've got everything lined up. Here we go. Let's have a think about different factors that affect whether people participate. As I mentioned earlier, for children 7 times 60 minutes, or for adults 5 times 30 minutes of physical activity. When we can talk about age first of all, and I'm going to think about younger people. I'm thinking about people like you, teenagers, perhaps younger. What might be some of the barriers that they might experience? Well, first of all, there might be transport restrictions. Young people generally don't drive, obviously, until the age of 17 or beyond. In the UK, that is. We've got the cost of things can be restrictive, someone that's not working and is studying. We've also got the idea of peer pressure. People can be kind of discouraged or indeed encouraged to participate or not based on the people around them. Now, we've also got people in their older, more mature years, perhaps people who are 60 plus, and maybe people in this group, they lack opportunity. Okay, so maybe there's fewer clubs that are relevant for them. Maybe there is a lesser expectation of people to be physically active at that stage. Those are going to influence people's decisions. Now, if we think about socioeconomic group, what we can find with lots of sports is the idea of exclusivity. Okay, we are not experiencing many unemployed people, for example, who are members of an exclusive golf club. Now, that's something that is kind of normal, but something that's worth reflecting on. Also, I want to throw in the word here, esteem. It's where one sees oneself, what one believes. Think about memberships and price of those things. And I just want to come back to that esteem. Now, think about environments you feel really comfortable in, welcomed in. Like, I'm really familiar with table tennis environments and tennis clubs and football clubs and this sort of thing. But if I go to like a golf club, which I don't really play very much, I feel all a bit funny, especially if it's like a posh one. I don't necessarily identify myself in that one. I've never done it, but I probably even feel more so with like a horse polo club. Oh my God, it's not for me. So that esteem is a really, really important point. It's not just whether one can afford things, it's whether one identifies in those spaces or not. So memberships are important. Think about fees. These are going to restrict people with with less cash flow. Gender. I'm just going to go to the term sex here, just for consistency, and I'm going to talk about biological males and biological females. And what we're going to say here is we have fewer, down arrow, female, and I'm going to put RM, role models. We've got down arrow, fewer less female coverage. Think about the disparity. Although it's improving between WSL football coverage and Premier League football coverage on the TV, WSL is growing, is doing brilliantly, fantastic, but the disparity is huge, and therefore, that's something that we want to be thinking about. We also want to throw in here the word stereotyping, and this can work in both directions. Think about females playing rugby. There's stereotypically not as common. Think about males taking part in ballet. Again, stereotypically, there are expectations and what have you. I've got another note in front of me that I can't actually read it, so I've got another point to, maybe I'll figure it out in a second. I'll come back to that one. Sorry, folks. Now then, in terms of disability and Paralympism in sports, what we find is there are fewer specialist coaches. Okay, so the idea that provision is not as is as good, and this is all relative. We got fewer specialised clubs, or fewer clubs that have a Paralympic section or an adapted section. There are fewer competitions to participate in, and also it can be a really expensive thing. Some of the technology around Paralympic performance, whether it's specialised wheelchairs for wheelchair basketball or whatever it happens to be, that can be really expensive, and of course that then coincides with this point over here. And finally, folks, I just want to come to ethnicity. Now, I'm never really sure what to put in this particular group, because sometimes it feels very twee and judgmental. But I'm just going to say that the availability of role models in certain environments is quite interesting. If we think about Afro-Caribbean, Black British representation in elite swimming, for example, is an interesting one. If we talk about, although it's improving, if we're talking about British Asian representation in association football, soccer, it's kind of nowhere near the level of society as a whole at the elite level. We often find also the idea of stacking. I'm not going to get into this, but stacking is the idea that certain people perform certain roles within sports based on their ethnicity. We often find that Afro-Caribbean, Black British athletes will be stacked towards powerful speed-based things based on perhaps more to do with ethnicity than any kind of biological ability. Also, these things are what we would call self-fulfilling. Think about perhaps a good quality young white British sprinter who may experience white flight away from sprinting, for example. There might be something about, they might choose that themselves. And also, I'm just going to put bluntly down here, cultural expectations. Now, I am not qualified to suggest what different cultural expectations are across different ethnicities. I think I know roughly what they are in my culture and my sort of ethnic culture, but I don't want to be sort of twee and sort of try and attempt to guess what others are, but perhaps they're different across groups. Now, when we then sort of broaden that out, we can find that any of these barriers can become specific barriers to the groups that we've just talked about: the young, the old, the rich, the rest, the poorer, the male, the female, the Paralympic, the Olympic, the white British, the non-white British, the British Asian, the Afro-Caribbean, Black British, etc. These factors here can all in different ways influence. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at some kind of, I suppose, case studies and see if we can draw some detail out from this. Okay, so what I want to do here is think about a young para-athlete planning to complete a para shot put for Team GB at the 2024 Paralympic Games. Now, we wrote this a little while ago. Obviously, that game's a few days away now as I actually do this session. But what would be the barrier here, and can we discuss that? And when we discuss that, I'm going to say here, will require, we can't just do this by yourself. You've got a requirement support that will require UK Athletics, that's the national governing body of athletics, UK Athletics support. It can't be done by itself. For example, let me go further. This person will need to be placed on what, I'm not going to teach exactly what this is. They will need to get what's called podium potential funding to support them. Okay, so this is not something that someone can just go, right, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get to the Olympics. No, you need coaching and nutritional advice, and you need physiotherapy. This is all provided by support networks. Now, access could be a potential barrier, so let's discuss that. So this person is going to need specialist equipment. Every elite athlete does, but perhaps it becomes, I suppose, air quotes, more specialist in the Paralympic kind of, a more individualized in the Paralympics. I'm not sure that's true. Especially equipment, coaches, and training environment. So that provision, that access needs to be there for this person. If it's not, the chance of success diminishes significantly. Let's take things further. We've got role models, and I'm going to introduce a term here. We've got a glass ceiling created by a lack of para shot putters, and certainly a glass ceiling created by the fact that even good ones like what's his name there, British record holder Alid, I want to say Alid Davies. Alid, is that right? Check that, Google that. I think it's Alid Davies who's the para British record holder. In fact, I think he might be British record holder Olympic shot put as well, but check that. I might be wrong about those. I watched him I saw him live in 2012. He was amazing. Anyway, check that name. But that lack of role model, but perhaps more specifically that lack of visibility of those role models, what that's going to do is it's going to lower expectations. Expectations are going to diminish as a result. Now let's go to another example. We have got a young male ballerina wanting to go to the Royal Ballet School. So what's sort of going to be the barriers, and can we discuss those? So let's think about this societally. Okay, so this person is very likely to experience stereotypes. Okay, stereotypes can limit confidence. Stereotypes can limit confidence and comfort for an individual. You know, that sort of idea of esteem, coming back to that. So environmental comfort, we'd call that. And it could cause what we might just air quotes call male flight. Male flight, the sort of the choice to depart that sport from dance. Okay. Now, what about peers? Now, we're tending to look at the negative here. I'm sure there's many supportive, but this person may experience criticism. I was tempted to say mockery even in this particular case. I mean, it's ridiculous, isn't it? It's meant to be sort of like an open, supportive... Anyway, let me not get into that. Even if successful. So even a successful dancer, male dancer, may experience this sort of thing. And again, this is going to decrease comfort and enjoyment. It's tough, isn't it, when people judge you, and especially in a young mind, you've got to kind of get over that. You've got to kind of adapt to that quite quickly. Anyway, I've got to change canvas straight back. Let's see if we can finish this off nice and strongly. We're still talking about our male dancer looking to get to ballet school here. So access, we might have fewer club spaces. What about this one? Lack of group-based dances. You know, it's not just about dancing individually. Of course, you know, a young male dancer needs to dance with other males to form certain experiences. And therefore there might be restrictions there. Now, let's get into local under 60 girls rugby team. Obviously, we're choosing these examples because they tend to be perhaps less well supported and provided for. What we say, role models, very few, but increasing. What this is going to do again is create that kind of limited sense of potential success. What about gender? Again, I'm just going to use the term sex here as biological constant. So what we're talking about here is a sense of lack of comfort, a sense of lack of comfort. That's all about that esteem point I made earlier, isn't it? Sense of lack of comfort. And we might experience things like stereotypes. And I don't like writing this on this because it can be quite hurtful, but the idea of the air quotes tomboy concept, you know, like, oh, a girl doing a boy's thing, it's called, you know, whatever. Obviously one can see quite around that quite quickly if you just ask one single question or challenge one single thought. But anyway, and what about family? What about the family may not support as much as they could, or if it was a male equivalent, a son rather than a daughter? Is that the case in some families? Is that really, really obvious and sort of big gesture sort of things, such as, you know, like, I'm not supporting you? That's often what we think is like a barrier, but no, the barrier could just be not being super supportive when they would be with a male child, for example. Now, let's move on straight away to commercialization. Massive topic. We have the golden triangle. Can I remind you that is the cyclical relationship between elite sport media companies and sponsors and advertisers, and it is in order to make profit. Okay, we call this a model of commercialized sport. The objective of that sport is that profit will be made by these parties. Now, what that profit is then done, or what's done with it, is quite an interesting question. Perhaps with elite sport, it can be put towards grassroots or other factors, but that's worth considering. Now, let's take this further. We have been asked here, let's make this a bit bigger. We've been asked here to explain one way in which media coverage increases participation levels. So, does it, and can we use language such as because, through, by, therefore? This language here is our classic explanatory language. So one way in which media coverage increases participation. So what have we got? So I'm going to say here, media can portray, go with me on this because it's important we get sort of good explanations. Positive. So media can portray positive role models. Fantastic. We've touched on that concept quite a bit already. Especially those which challenge stereotypes. I mean, lionesses springs to mind, don't they, as a really good example of that. Traditional stereotypes such as, air quotes, football's a boys' sport, Now, just to be clear, that is not my perspective. We're putting that in air quotes as a traditional stereotype. So what we get here, if I now go because of the success of the Lionesses, in fact, I put it in plural because obviously Euro champs and World Cup final, because of the successes of the Lionesses, this is the England women's football team if you're not sure, because of the success of the Lionesses in the Euros and Worlds, I'll just put Worlds, World Cup obviously is what I mean there, and Worlds covered, and obviously we want to get our companies by BBC, Sky, obviously I could go into loads of bloggers and articles and newspapers, and in print, has created a new cultural perspective. On women's football, leading to, I'm getting sort of big writing now, up arrow participation. So there's my answer. I'm clearly talking about the influence of media, BBC, Sky, these sorts of prominent events, talking about role models and getting participation levels, inspiring younger generations, etc., etc. Notice I didn't mention the word sponsor anywhere. Why? Because it wasn't in the question. However, if I come to this one, explain how media plays an important role in the sponsorship of players, teams and equipment and facilities, this is a completely different answer. So I go into something different. Media companies, let's imagine Sky Sports. Media sells, sponsor or advertising space to companies. We could name one here. I don't know, Gillette razors or something. To companies who can increase brand awareness. So the Gillette brand becomes more familiar. What's it called? I can't remember all their products, but Gillette, or whatever that is, or what's that? Silky, oh, it's for girls. And this is just me paraphrasing. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, they're so different. Hairs coming out of follicles. Always winds me up, that one. I don't know what happened just there. Brand awareness. And make their products desirable, not what I just did, and make their products desirable. One of my mates, by the way, he was the director of photography on some of those Gillette best a man could get adverts for Hispanic speaking parts of the world. I think they did it with Rafa Marquez. Who else was in that? Was it Rafa Marquez, Rafa Nadal, and there's another Spanish speaking person. I can't remember who it was now. Anyway, so products desirable. Companies are seen. Oh God, this is long going, isn't it? I should have written this in advance. Are seen in association with healthy sport. Healthy sport, companies can become household names. I'll just put households for speed. The point I want to make there is I'm clearly talking about the relationship between media and sponsors. That's my job, and that's why I'm answering. I'll go one further. By the way, this one here shouldn't say the question. It should really say here, obviously we miscopied something here. This one should say the relationship between sponsors, and over here we've got elite sport. Okay, so that's really the connection we want to think about. There's the illustration there, and we're going to say elite sport. Bear with me, folks. I know you're hanging in there, and I appreciate it. Okay, elite sport can earn more money. I should put revenue, which enables. Bear with me a second, folks. There we go. My tablet went off. Which enables a more professional training environment, a more pro training environment. We could say full-time athletes, FT, full-time athletes, and the quality of performance increases. Bear with me a second, my tab has gone off again. Performance increases. Lovely. And we can also say this can cause a better spectacle because, effectively the product's better, the performance levels are better, a better spectacle, and more desirable. And what I mean by desirable is more people want to watch it through the media. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about the impact sponsors and that money can have on elite sport. In this case, it can bring that elite sport greater funding. That could be incorporated into grassroots. It could be incorporated into technology. It could go into corporate for elite performers becoming full-time and so on. Now, what I'm going to do here, guys, is I'm simply going to flash this topic 9 at you because it's very much based on that. You'll notice that this is all about an evaluation. Now, I'm not going to bore you senses by simply reading these points out, but this is the point. When you are asked about the impact of commercialization on a player or a team, you must make these associations. These are the positives, these are the negatives. Now, if we were to compare them to something like the influence of commercialization on the spectator, the influence is different, and I want you to be competent in getting those specific points into your answers. Now, again, it's a bit sort of pointless of me just reading out to you, so I'm not going to do that, but I'm saying you must learn these specifically. Okay, so I'm not going to bore you senseless, but you must learn them in relation to the spectator. You must learn them in relation to the impact on the sport. You must learn them on relation. And this one's perhaps the hardest one. What's the impact of commercialization on the sponsor? Well, we get brand awareness, touched on that, better profits, increased recognition, global brand. Brilliant for Gillette or whoever. Athlete may test positive for drugs and we've just sponsored them. Oh, God. Poor reputation because if something goes wrong. Drop in sales, we've spent a fortune, it hasn't worked. Unsuccessful performances, you don't back the winner. You sponsor a team and they don't do so well. That's going to not necessarily come across so well. That is an evaluation of commercialization, folks. And I want you guys to spend your time learning those things. Get those in your answers. Last bit coming up. Right then, my little cherubs, let's finish this off nice and strongly. We've got different types of sport and behaviour. Let me just zoom in a little bit here. We've got sportsmanship first. Again, I'm mindful not to read this out to you, but unwritten rules, fairness, code of ethics, self-control, fairness, etiquette, respect. Now, a couple of examples. We've got kicking the ball out for a player injured. I suppose that's a sort of soccer example. Walking in cricket when you know you're out. Conforming to the rules and the spirit and the etiquette. There's our definition. Now, that's what we mean by a sportsman-like behaviour. And by the way, it is referred to as sportsmanship, not sportspersonship at the time that I recorded this, just to be clear on that one. Now, gamesmanship sometimes is seen as the opposite of that, but it isn't the opposite. It's actually, it sits in the parameter, it sits within the same rule base as sportsmanship. Why? Because it is only bending the rules. And I say only, it can be quite irritating, but it's not breaking them. So it's as legal as sportsmanship is. Okay, and we need to remember that. And it's increased due to win ethic. Now, win ethic is where people will take every 1% possible advantage and turn it to the maximum and make sure it goes in their favour. Now, I'm going to be critical of some of what we've got here in these examples, but we're talking about increase due to more importance of winning and the pressure that comes with it. And I would just link back now to kind of commercialise sport. If we think about commercialised sport, that attempt to make profit, of course, therefore winning becomes really, really important. Now, this one's an interesting one. I'm actually going to delete that. I don't think that should be considered gamesmanship. I think if we said slightly delaying play and somehow were to say kind of like within the rules, then that's gamesmanship. If you say things like diving, if you say things like faking, if you say things like wasting time, these are cheating, okay? This is not gamesmanship. It's outside of the rules, so be careful. Appealing, this is in some sports. Some sports allow it and some don't, but appealing can be considered gamesmanship. Sometimes players appeal for decision even though they know that it shouldn't be there, whatever it happens to be. And also exaggerating. Notice not faking a foul, exaggerating a foul, letting a referee or an umpire know that you've been fouled by sort of exaggerating it. That's what we mean. Now, we've also got the concept of deviance here, okay? So here's our deviance. We've got cheating, outside the rules, match fixing, doping, violence, faking. Overtraining is an interesting one because it's called positive deviance. I've just thrown that in there for you. Why do people do it? It's not for the win ethic, which is taking every marginal gain possible, but it's win at all costs. No matter what it takes, we are here to win, and that's what we're going to do. And cheating is incorporated into that. Rewards, money, fame, pressure, reproach, culture of cheating, cycling in the 90s and 2000s. My God, constant doping. Frustration might cause someone to maybe lash out and be violent, for example. And also people do it because they want to win. What are the consequences? People get banned, fined, they lose their sponsorship, they become negative role models, they lose their reputation. They could even be in prison. There have been a couple of examples of that in the past, and people would lose their medals and their awards. Now, what I want to quickly do is I just want to make sure that we can get this clear. In football and tennis, what would be sportsmanship and gamesmanship? So let's go with blue, sportsmanship. What would it be in football? I'm going to say kick the ball out. This is for obviously the injured opponent type scenario. That's what we'd say there. And also, we're going to say here, do not time waste. Okay, so we've got that idea there of taking the negative, the kind of the cheating bit, and turning it positive. What about sportsmanship in tennis? What about you? I bet you guys have done this. Call your own faults. You know, you don't need an umpire to tell you that the ball's in or out, because you can call them yourselves and be honest about it. And you might do something called, you might acknowledge, let's acknowledge what we call a bump ball. Okay, and what we mean by that is when the ball has been has hit the ground twice, and it's sort of hard to tell. Usually the player knows for sure whether that's happened or not. What about gamesmanship? What would be examples of that in football, for example? Well, we could say something like exaggerating foul, not faking, because that would be cheating, that would be deviance, but exaggerating foul. And what about this one? Leaving pitch slowly. That's the idea of slightly delaying the game. What about in gamesmanship? When in tennis, the player could smash at the opponent rather than past them or around them. You know, you actually just a little bit of intimidation in there. Completely legal, but you know. Also, you could slow down play slightly. Okay, now there are time limits in tennis, so you can't do that excessively, but you could slow down and change the rhythm of play of the opponent, even though it's not natural for you. And then deviance, what would we get? Well, things like violent conduct, you know, striking an opponent. I saw, I think it was Reece James in a men's match recently, kick out and an opponent got sent off. What about something like spot fixing? This has become quite interesting because there have been a couple of people found to be doing this and have been prosecuted for it. In terms of deviance in tennis, what would be examples? Well, if an individual was taking steroids, a performance-enhancing drug. What about this one? Abuse of a line judge, and I mean verbal abuse. That's not funny, but I mean verbal abuse there is what I'm talking about. So that's what we mean by examples of those things. Now, just quickly, guys, to finish this off, and we've gone very long in this session, I just want to make sure that we can evaluate, give the reasons and the consequences for sportsmanship at elite level, gamesmanship at grassroots, and deviance at elite level. So let's think about this. We're talking about sportsmanship at elite level. What's the reason for this? Well, we want to maintain integrity. Let me change colour because I think that's not the darkest, so let me just go to something a bit darker. Maintain integrity with the sport. We want to allow others to excel. Now, I'm not going to get into it here, but we actually call that the contract to compete, but we don't cover that in this course. But it's called, and also we could simply say be different. And what I mean by that is that so many sports have gone down this like gamesmanship route, that like, you know, that high sportsmanship at elite level is a nice way to think about it. Now, what are the consequences? Well, the first one is a player could be criticised, potential criticism. I've seen this loads, you know, like walking in cricket, you should have stayed there and waited, you know. What about something like less chance of winning? One of the problems with gamesmanship is it does increase the chance of winning. So if we behave sportsmanlike, perhaps we decrease that possibility. Let's look at gamesmanship at grassroots level. It feels a bit weird. Why would someone do that? Well, we would get the reason would be an overemphasis on winning. You know, I see this a lot around sort of youth football. You know, like parents can get a little bit carried away. And we've also got the importance, or the perceived importance of competition. And what are the kind of the consequences of that? Well, I think it's fair to say it would cause distaste, you know, like parents screaming and shouting and swearing at referees. Being removed is another one, you know, whether that's the player being sent off or whatever it happens to be, or, you know, something like that. And also it's really unpleasant for others. I've been in numerous cases where I'm like, what is that person doing? You know, it's a bit of a weird scenario to be in. And what about deviance at elite level? Why does it happen? Well, it happens because people are hyper competitive. That's why people will dope, for example, competitive. Obviously, there's a couple of details in there. But also, it's because there are lots of extrinsic rewards. You know, if you go and succeed, if you win, if you're the champion, there's lots of extrinsic rewards for that. That's why people do it. But what's some of the consequences? You might lose reputation. You know, someone who was thought to be a high-level performer turns out to be a cheat. And you might lose trust from those around you, including your family, if you've obviously typically been lying to them about whether it's doping or match fixing or whatever it happens to be. So, some interesting points there. Hope that helps. Cheers. Marta, we don't have long. I've just seen the time, 25 past. Any questions or requirements?
Yes, very, very quickly. Can you please, James, clarify why time wasting or diving are not gamesmanship?
Okay, the direct answer to that is they're both outside the rules. So that's why I was sort of saying slightly delaying, because you probably get away with that. You know, it's like, it's probably not rule breaking, but you're sort of getting a little bit of an advantage if you're ahead or whatever, or you're trying to disrupt your opponent. Something like if you're fouled and you exaggerate it is not outside the rules. So again, it's gamesmanship. But if you simulate dive, that is absolutely outside the rules and is a deviant behaviour and can be considered a form of cheating. So that's where there's no grey area there. It's that the gamesmanship itself is the grey area. Gamesmanship is within the rules, and the line has been drawn in a particular place, and people butt up against that line and take the fullest advantage of where that rule ends. If the rule says you cannot simulate a foul, what people will do is they will exaggerate fouls. If the rule changed, say you can't exaggerate fouls or foul play, that would be a real issue of interpretation, because people would, how do you know that someone hasn't sort of exaggerated a little bit? How do you know that they have? You don't ultimately. So that's why the line is drawn in that place. So that's why, it's because they're within the rules, and people, wherever you'll get hyper competitiveness, especially with large extrinsic rewards, you will get extreme forms of gamesmanship, because people will take every advantage they possibly can to get that marginal gain over others they're competing with, and that's what happens.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, Marta, we're due on AQA in 3 minutes, so we're going to have to go out. Guys, I'm going to play you out the little bit of Sorry?
Let's run.
Yeah, I'm going to play you out the bit of music, the briefest. Thank you so much for being here live, especially during your half term, guys. It was the best time for us to put it on, we felt. We wanted to get paper ones out of the way before we did this, obviously bank holiday weekend and all that, and hopefully that's been useful. Get it shared with your mates, you students, get them in front of it, and we appreciate you. Have a brilliant paper 2. Best of luck with it, and we'll see you for A-level. Hey, who knows? Or BTEC or whatever. Cheers, guys.